Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to my first over-the-board analysis video where I'll be analyzing games from my own practice in tournaments that I play. And I just played a tournament here in Minnesota, my home state. It was our Minnesota State Closed Championships, and I had some very interesting games, and I figured this would be a great tournament to begin this series with. So this Minnesota Closed Championship, I thought I'd just show you the webpage for it and give you a summary of the results before I take you through the tournament game by game. Today will just be the first game, by the way. But this was a 6-player round robin that is played each year to determine the overall state champion. And this year, it was won by, drumroll, Sean Nagel, who is an international master here in Minnesota, a good friend of mine. And he won the tournament with, as you can see from this cross table, 4.5 points out of 5. Very strong score. And yeah, he pretty much wiped the floor with everyone for the first 4 rounds and then drew his last game and got out of there with a half-point win. You could see me in second place. I had the misfortune of losing to Sean in round 2 in a very interesting game. And I won the rest of my games, but I finished a half-point behind. So him and I are both IMs. The guy who finished in third place, Kevin Wasiluk, with 3 points out of 5. He's a FIDE master, also a very good player. Doesn't play much outside of our state, but if he did, I'm pretty sure he'd be competing for IM norms, international master norms. Number 4, we have Andrew Tang. This is a young player from here in our state. He's, I believe, 15 years old. He's a freshman in high school, and he's already an IM. By virtue of winning the North American Youth Tournament last summer. He was awarded the IM title based on that. So as you can see, like, very strong rating for a youngster. He was the youngest player in the field by probably 6 or 7 years. And then these 2 last guys, Wilson Gibbons and Matthew Dahl, are both national masters, so they don't have an international title. But a national master, for those of you who don't know about US Chess Federation ratings, that's a rating of 2,200 or higher, which both of those guys have. So pretty strong tournament. This was definitely one of the stronger state championships we had in recent memory. And I'm going to take you through each one of my games, just round by round, and we'll be discussing them. This tournament was played at a time control of 40 moves in 90 minutes, with an additional 30 minutes after that if the game is still going, and there was a 30-second increment throughout. I will link you guys to this website. This will probably be the only time I show it to you, but I'll link you to this website where you can actually click on and view like all of the games. Also link you to the cross table on the US Chess Federation website. There were some other sections too. There was an amateur section and a reserve section for players. I believe the amateur is below 2,000 and the reserve is below 1,600, but I won't be focusing on those games. So without further ado, let me switch over to my first game. So this was played in round 1, and since this is a round-robin tournament, you get a crack at everyone. I was lucky to have 3 whites out of the 5 games in this tournament, which honestly I think is pretty huge in just a 5-round tournament. Like, there's a big difference between having 3 whites and 2 whites in a tournament like this. Especially where you know the pairings in advance, as we did. The pairings were posted like a couple weeks in advance. So just to give you a little history on myself and also Andrew. Andrew is my student. He's my highest rated student with a FIDE rating of 2326. This is my FIDE rating too, by the way. And he's a very talented player. He's actually beaten me before. In our very first over-the-board game, I think back in 2012, he actually beat me. And that was right when I started working with him as a coach. So I was like, oh man, do I have anything to teach this kid? But fortunately, I still have a thing or two to teach him, and he's very, very strong, and we always have interesting games. So without further ado, let me get started with this one. It's always tough playing a student because obviously I know his style like very well, and he knows my style in addition. But I have so much knowledge about his strengths and weaknesses as a player. In a way, it almost seems unfair. And whenever I play him, I try to make it interesting, and I don't pull any punches, but I'm also not going to like ruthlessly go for his very weakest spot in his repertoire. Some people may disagree about this, but I think like the most, I guess, fair thing to do when you're playing someone you're very close to like that is to just strive for an interesting game. You know, I'm going to try my best against him, but I'm not going to play the sharpest line I can imagine against him and prepare for months in advance just for this one game. No, that's not my style. So we played a Queen's Gambit Declined, and I always play this line. You guys have seen from my videos. I just think it's very good. Knight c3 on move 3, and Andrew plays a trendy move, bishop e7. This is a line that him and I have studied before. It's a very good move, and for those of you who don't know what the purpose of this move is, you might want to take a look at some of my videos because I've discussed it at length, but basically the short version is if black plays knight f6, which is a very normal move, then white can trade on d5 and then play bishop g5, which leads to the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined. Conventional theory says white has a very easy game in this line, and the stats bear that out as well. I think white scores something like 70% in some of the main lines that result from this position. So the point of bishop e7 on move 3 is to try to sidestep that line. So by playing bishop e7, black rules out bishop g5 and tries to make it just a little bit more difficult for white to get their favorite setup. So Andrew and I have played this exact line before on a couple occasions. So I captured on d5, and then I developed the bishop to f4. So if white can't go to g5, bringing the bishop to f4 is the next best thing. And now he played c6. So c6 is designed to get the bishop to f5 as quickly as possible. You can see that black is foregoing the traditional development of the knight to f6, and that's for a very specific purpose. Andrew wants to get the bishop to f5 as soon as he can, because he knows in this line the development of the light square bishop is critical, and whether black will equalize fully often revolves around whether he can get this light square bishop out and into the game. So c6 is an ambitious move, trying to play bishop f5. Now in this position, there's two moves for white, both of which I've played before. There's e3, as I played in this game, and there's also queen c2. And queen c2, as you might expect, is directed against bishop f5, trying to control that square. So in this one I played e3, which does allow bishop f5, but white has a couple remedies to this bishop already being out on its ideal square. One is a move popularized by Bartholomew, which is g4 in this position. So pawn g4. Many books consider this to be the critical move in this position, and I can't really disagree because it's very principled. You immediately try to kick this bishop off balance. Black has a choice between bishop e6 and bishop g6. Bishop g6 is supposed to be inaccurate because of h4, trying to storm this light square bishop. And if black is to take the pawn on h4 now, queen b3 can lead to trouble for black, kind of hitting them where it hurts on the queen side. Theory says black shouldn't mess around with this position, and I definitely agree. So if I had played that, Andrew would have played bishop e6, but both him and I are aware of this line, and I think we tend to think that black has reasonable play, although it's very interesting. But bishop e6 is the move here. Another move that is interesting in this position for white is knight ge2. So knight ge2. The idea of this move is to try to come to g3 with the knight, and again, kick this bishop off balance. A lot of times after knight g3 and then bishop g6, white will play the h4 move again, or they might go bishop to d3 and offer a trade. So let's just say hypothetically knight f6, knight g3, bishop g6. Here h4 would be interesting, but let's just say for the sake of argument, bishop d3 is played. After a subsequent trade, white could argue that the knight being positioned on g3 is ideally positioned to jump into f5 and exploit this square that the light square bishop no longer controls because the light square bishop is exchanged. So that's another option for white, to play knight ge2 in that position. Here, I actually decided to play an offbeat move. This move is completely playable for white, It's just not very popular, and it's nothing earth-shattering either. I just played the move h3. I had seen this in the database, and it seemed interesting. Morozevich is one grandmaster who has played this before. But basically, h3 in a lot of Queen's Gambit decline structures is a useful move. It gives the dark square bishop a nice square on h2 to drop back to. And also, I'm retaining the option of playing g4, but just under more support for the pawn. So if I do decide to play g4 later, I'll already have this pawn on h3 supporting it. So more than anything, I was just trying to get kind of a unique battle and open game going after h3. A game in which we can both start thinking for ourselves rather than rely on existing theory that him and I may have studied together even before. So h3. Here, Andrew thought for a little bit and played an interesting move. That aforementioned Morozevich game went knight d7, but Andrew decided to play bishop d6, which I thought was interesting. So kind of wasting a tempo with the dark square bishop since he had already developed it to e7, but deciding that he wants to attempt to trade off these bishops, or at least offer a trade. So I played knight ge2 in reply. So saying that if you want to trade, that's okay, but I'm going to get my knight into f4. He played knight f6. Now here, I want to be able to develop my light square bishop, but obviously with my knight on e2, there's kind of a congestion problem. So I played pawn to g4, making good on my promise from earlier. He played bishop g6. I went bishop g2. I also saw a game or two in the database where white adopted this formation. So fianchettoing the light square bishop. Kind of unusual for this line. He castled. I castled. He played rook e8. Very sensible move, I think. Now here, some of you who play this line might know one of white's main strategies in exchange QGD positions, which this sort of resembles now, is this plan involving the central pawn push. So preparing f3 and then e4 to try to overwhelm black in the center and use the fact that white has one extra center pawn compared to black. So I played f3 in this position. The other plan would be a minority attack, which if you identified that this was possible based on the pawn structure, that's very good. A minority attack would entail preparing b4, b5 in order to attack c6 and trying to induce some sort of weakness in black's pawn structure. But given the way I've developed, a minority attack isn't really appropriate in this position. Moreover, black's bishop on g6 does a good job of eyeing the b1 square. So if I wanted to prepare b4, it's not at all easy because I can't stick my rook behind it. That's how you would usually prepare it in preparation for b4. So I opted for this center plan by playing f3. Now, I knew this was potentially sort of a bluff because I was wondering if he might be able to take on f4. And you might notice the problem if I take with a knight. It's that he can take my pawn on e3. So I was intending to take with the pawn if this line were to occur. And I say bluff because knowing Andrew and his playing style, I didn't think he would want to go for this, where white has doubled pawns, but the threat of f5 looks kind of scary for black. I didn't think he would want to cede me the initiative like this and potentially have his light square bishop locked out of the game, let's say in the event of h6, f5, bishop h7. Although the computer says that black is actually slightly better here, very slightly, 2/10 of a pawn, basically. But I wouldn't have minded playing this position. I think this is also interesting, and white has plenty of play as well. Instead, though, he just played a sensible move. He played queen to e7. I went queen d2. He played knight bd7. So notice that moving the queen to e7 was useful because if he were to have played knight bd7 immediately in that position, he would just be dropping his bishop on d6. So he needs some reliable support, and that's why he played queen e7. So queen d2, knight bd7. And here, I hadn't given up on the goal of playing e4 yet, but we have to be realistic about our expectations of playing e4. So right now, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces all trained on that square. And I have 1, 2, 3. So I need some more support if I'm going to hope to get that advance in. So I played the move rook ae1. I use this rook because in the event of e4 and an exchange of pawns on e4, it's very likely I'll want to take back with my f pawn, and this rook could be useful on the f file where it stands right now. So that's why I played rook a e1 instead of rook f e1. Here he played rook a d8, so both our armies are arrayed out very nicely, ready for battle. And I saw no reason not to play e4 in this position, which might seem weird based on what I said about the number of attackers and defenders. So yeah, it's true that he has quite a few attackers on the e4 square, but consider the piece that might be overloaded for him. And if you identify that as the queen, then good job. Basically, after d takes e4, which is what happened in the game, and f takes e4, he can't hope to win a pawn by taking on e4, because if he starts chopping like so, his bishop on d6 will be undefended. So in the event of queen takes e4, I could just capture on d6, and I win a piece. So that holds him back a little bit. And all the same, I think it's very nice that I have a rook on e1 opposing his queen. That helps me out in a lot of lines. So going back after I played e4 and we did exchange these pawns, he instead took on f4. And here's where the point about playing rook a e1 is revealed, because I took with the knight, and my rook is able to assist in defending this pawn. So again, he outnumbers me in attackers on this square, but it doesn't matter because he's leading with one of his more expensive pieces, if you will. So again, if he starts chopping on e4, and then this happens, this is not going to work out well for him because he'd have to give up his queen in order to wind up with having the last piece on e4. Obviously not worth it. So I was pretty pleased with my position after knight takes f4. I thought, well, black's pretty solid. He's got nice centralized pieces and not many weaknesses, but I've got the pawn duo that you strive for out of the Queen's Gambit declines. It's a position. White might be slightly better. There's a fight ahead. And indeed, there was a fight ahead. So he played knight b6. I played e5. Sometimes it's good to maintain the integrity of these pawns and not advance them for a while, but I felt like playing e5 was good to knock this knight off balance and also open my light square bishop. So he played knight fd5 in this position. And I decided to take this pesky bishop on g6. This is a piece with a pretty good diagonal. When I ran this through the engine, it was initially more concerned with eliminating one of the knights on d5, but after giving it some time to think, it does agree with what I played, which is eliminating the bishop. And the reason for that is after he takes with the h-pawn, I can play knight e4. This is my point. Those of you who have watched a lot of my videos might remember me talking about the concept of the superfluous piece. And basically, a superfluous piece is a piece that is duplicated in your own army. So for instance, in this position, black has these two knights, and Andrew really likes his knight on d5, but his knight on b6 has less to do because it's also striving for the d5 square. So if I were to simply exchange on d5, I'm allowing this knight to become useful by capturing on this square. It's no longer a superfluous piece. It's no longer redundant. So knight e4 is kind of a double whammy move because it's directed against this knight on b6 in some sense, and also is just striving for new horizons with my own knight. I mean, I'm trying to get into the d6 square. c5 might also be good, maybe even g5 in some cases to attack f7. So all in all, I think knight e4 is a very useful move. And his next move surprised me. He played queen h4. I think he played this mainly to annoy me more than anything because the queen is kind of a bother on this square. It's close to my king. It kind of freezes my pawns over here. Also gets his queen out of the way of any potential problems down the e-file. And I decided to play a prophylactic move at this point. A prophylactic move is a move that prevents your opponent's threat before it becomes a problem. So I played b3, just restricting this knight, keeping it out of c4 mainly. I also had an eye towards potentially playing a4, a5, and kicking this knight away. He played rook e7 at this point. And now I jumped into d6. He didn't like that knight on d6, naturally, so he played knight c8 in a bid to exchange it. I maybe could have retreated my knight at this point, but I saw a plan based on knight takes c8, so I did play this move, and he took back. And I was staring at this queen on h4 for the last couple moves, really since he played queen h4 a few moves back. And I decided that it might be interesting to try to ensnare that queen. You know, it's always difficult to try to trap a queen, but I played g5 in an effort to cut down on its scope so it can never escape diagonally now. And I had some ambitions of trying to surround it. So he played rook d8 in this position. Black is still very solid. I mean, he has a nice knight positioned in the center, 2 good rooks, not a lot of weaknesses, but I felt like my pieces were also well positioned, and my space advantage should probably mean something, should translate into at least a small advantage. So here, I played rook e4, attacking his queen. With this move, I was hoping for queen g3. I was hoping he would keep his queen active, but that would be a big blunder in view of rook f3, and the queen has nowhere to go. I would just be trapping and winning it. But of course, he's too good for that, so he played instead queen to h5. Now, when I'm going through these games, I'm going to be giving you guys a quiz or two throughout, especially if I think the position lends itself well to something that can be calculated or a good quiz question. So this will be the first quiz question in this game. So white to move is my move. Give me a good potential plan for white. And as a hint, if you want a hint, it should be based on the position of black's queen. So how can white exploit the position of black's queen on the edge of the board? You can pause your recording if you like. Okay, so in this position, I played the move h4, which was mainly designed to further protect g5 and also give myself the option of bishop h3. But that was not the best move. I had a much better try than h4. And it's a real interesting idea. It's the move king h2. And if you found this move and the associated idea, very good job, because I didn't see it over the board. So the idea is to advance the king to g3, whereupon I'll be threatening rook h4. And his queen will be trapped on this h column. And if everything goes according to plan, white will just trap it. So black, kind of play some like nonchalant moves over the next move or so. They're going to get their queen trapped. Because I control all of the flight squares, g5 is protected, there's nowhere safe on the diagonal for this queen to go. It's almost like a caveman-like trap, but it's pretty tough for black to stop, in fact. I ran this through the engine as well, and the engine said that black's best chance is actually to play king f8 in preparation for going queen back to h7 or h8 and hiding on g8. So by virtue of king g3 threatening rook h4, white can banish black's queen all the way to g8, where it's extremely passive. So I thought that was a interesting repercussion of this king h2 move. But instead, like I said, I played h4. And here, I think black has a pretty good chance for counterplay. It's the move f5. The computer was very fond of this move. Just striking back on the king side. If I were to take en passant, he could take with his g-pawn. And I'm somewhat pinned down the e file. So like if I were to take here, I believe rook takes e4, bishop takes e4. At the very least, he could play queen takes h4, I would bet, and this would probably work out well for him. My king is very open, the bishop's under attack, the f-pawn is not too dangerous yet. So f5 might have been an interesting shot, but he was thinking a bit more defensively, and he played knight c7, just withdrawing the knight. And I think Andrew did this with an eye towards like doubling up on the d-file and also maybe getting in knight e6, which is essentially what happened in the game. So I went queen b4 in this position, attacking his rook on e7 and also the pawn. He played rook ed7. I mentioned to him after the game I thought he should have played knight d5. and just repeated the position, or tried to repeat the position. I thought knight d5 was a much more solid way of playing, because then the knight attacks the queen. It also defends the rook, and it vacates the 7th rank, so the rook can defend the b-pawn. So I'm not able to play queen takes b7. And against this, I was probably just going to go retreat back to d2 or maybe e1, and it's not clear that white has gained anything. So instead, though, he played rook ed7. I played bishop h3. This is one reason I played h4. I wanted to give my bishop the option of switching diagonals like this. So I'm attacking his rook. He played knight e6. I decided here, despite some misgivings about this move, I decided it was best to trade my bishop for his knight before I have too serious of problems on d4, because he is attacking d4 3 times now, both his rooks and the knight. So bishop takes e6. He takes with the f-pawn. Now, this position is kind of deceptive. I don't know. You could probably make a case for both sides in this position. The pawn structure favors white. Like, black's pawns have been somewhat shattered. Also, black's queen is still stuck on the side of the board. But white's in danger of becoming overextended. And these far-flung pawns need protection. Also, white's king is pretty open. So it's hard to say. I think white is like a tiny bit better here, but as happened in the game, black can quickly generate counterplay if white plays even like one inaccurate move. So I played king g2. I didn't really want my king on the back rank, and I had a tentative plan of bringing the king up to g3 to assist in defending h4. He played king h7. Good move just to tuck the king away on the side of the board. Here I played rook f3. This move was perhaps a waste of time, but I was intent on taking away squares from this queen. It's kind of like hoping to box this queen in. I knew I couldn't necessarily win that queen because I don't have a piece that could even attack it other than my own queen. But I wanted to reduce the scope of the black queen over there, and I was kind of biding my time too. This is move 31, and once again, the time control is 40 moves in 90 minutes with an additional 30 minutes after that. So we were already getting like fairly low on time at this point, so I wasn't looking for exactly the most precise moves. I was just trying to play practical moves. So he played b6. Idea of this is to prepare c5. And this will be the primary vehicle for black to generate counterplay in the position. He's going to try to open the d file and infiltrate with his rooks. So b6, I played queen c4, and Andrew went ahead and played c5. And I got to admit, I was getting a little bit nervous here because I was slightly down on time compared to him, and it looks like black could take over the initiative, and it might be my king that proves to be the weaker one. I think that was a very realistic possibility based on his king being tucked away on the side of the board. So I took on c5. He gave a check on d2. I played king g3. He decided to take on c5. It would have also been interesting to play either rook takes a2 or rook d1. And he has a similar choice on the next move. But he was concerned about my c-pawn potentially becoming passed, so he just took on c5. And I was kind of relieved to see that because I took on e6. And my plan now is to go queen g4. It seems strange to be gung-ho about trading queens here, but I really felt the danger to my king. Like, if he were to get a couple tempos and double up on the second rank with his rooks, then the combination of those two rampaging rooks plus his queen could be deadly pretty fast. So now that I had won that pawn on e6 and I had a passed e-pawn, I was very much looking forward to the prospect of playing queen g4. And with his next move, he lets me do that. So he played the move rook takes a2. That was inaccurate. He should have played rook d1, which prevents queen g4 because of rook g1 check, winning the queen. So rook d1 would have given him good play. I think the engine said it was roughly equal still, but this would have given him much more of an active position compared to the game. So in the game, he took on a2. I played queen g4, and I kind of breathed a sigh of relief inward after this because I knew the queens were going to get exchanged. I took with the king. I figured I had the advantage in this endgame, although we were low on time. This is move 37, so we have a few more moves to make before time control is reached and we get that additional 30 minutes. But I figured with my past e-pawn and my king being pretty active as well, I figured I was the one who was pushing for a win. So he played rook g2 check. I went king f4. He played rook h2, attacking the h-pawn. I played e6, giving up the h4 pawn if he wants it, but I figured after rook takes h4 and then king e5, the h-pawn barely matters. I mean, it wasn't like preventing black from pushing the g-pawns or anything. And if the rooks were to get exchanged, this endgame is absolutely winning for white, because my king is so close to assisting the e-pawn, and his king is unable to come back in defense to help out because it's cut off down the f-file. So that's what I was hoping for. I was hoping to exchange one pair of rooks, get to a single rook endgame where my superior king activity plus the centralized pawn would be the decisive factor. Instead, however, Andrew played it cool. He did not take on h4. He played king g8. And now this is move 40, the move that I'm about to make, so last move of time control. I played e7. Passed pawns must be pushed, right? It's actually possible that this is a slight mistake, but it was a very hard move to resist under the circumstances. He went rook e8. I played king g3, attacking his rook, also uncovering the f-file, preventing his king from coming up. And he played rook d2. So this is the second major question I wanted to ask you guys about, because this is the decisive position of the game right here. So this is white to move. Try to find a good continuation for white in order to play for a win. I'll tell you that this position is probably drawn with best play, but there is a move here and a continuation that white has that gives me good practical chances of winning and will really push black to the limits. So see if you can find it. White to move. Okay, so I'm going to reveal the solution. So the move I played in the game was h5. And I had this idea a couple moves back, and I, at this moment, was just kind of calculating to see whether this was a viable option. But h5 is very interesting because I'm playing for a mating attack with this move. And it worked perfectly in the game because Andrew made an unfortunate blunder now, and I was able to demonstrate the main idea. So he took on h5, and the point is now I get to play pawn g6, and his king is completely trapped in on the back rank. I've taken away 2 flight squares with my pawn. Now, what he missed when he was capturing on h5 is that white has a deadly threat in this position. So let's say black continues with rook d7, natural move, trying to corral this very dangerous e-pawn. White has this excellent move, rook f8, which, if you noticed when you were deciding to play h5, that's excellent because I don't think this idea is like super obvious or anything. And the point is that after rook takes f8, we do not take the rook with check. Taking the rook with check would be a bad idea. After this, black is the only one who can win. Instead, we push the pawn. So we play e8 queen. And this is where the g6 pawn really shines. Because by playing e8 queen, we're saying, here, go ahead and take us. But if black does play rook takes e8, it's a back rank checkmate. And the g6 pawn is the MVP of the game because it takes away those flight squares. So this is what I had envisioned when I played h5. Unfortunately for him, after h5, pawn takes, and then g6, there is no defense to what white has planned. So I just gave a line with rook d7, but anything else for black is losing in a similar way. Just the threat of rook f8 check, rook takes f8, and then e8 queen is overwhelming. Black cannot escape this back rank conundrum, nor can he eliminate the g6 pawn in time. In the game, in this position, Andrew played h4 check. I could sidestep with my king, king h3, but I actually just played rook takes h4. And he went rook d6. And here, if you want just a mini quiz to wrap up this game, white to move and win. What should white do? Okay, I suspect this is a pretty easy one for most people. There's two winning moves. Rook f8 check is one of them, forcing rook takes f8, and then rook h8, deflecting the king. And then after king takes, you could promote to a queen or a rook. Both are checkmate. And again, the g6 pawn is essential to this combination working. It takes away the flight square. I guess even if the g6 pawn didn't exist, white would still be winning with the queen, but it's nice to have that g6 pawn there. Or there's the twin solution, which is rook h8. That's the move I actually played with an identical line. King takes h8, rook f8, and white will be mating. So Andrew resigned after rook h8 check. Now, interestingly enough, this is pretty difficult, but after h5, I had mentioned that this position is probably drawn with best play. Black does have one move to hold in this position. It's a very precise move, though. I think there's only one way to do it. There might be another way, but there's one clearly best way for black to try to draw this position. So if you want a real challenge, and I warn you, this is kind of difficult, but if you want a real challenge, try to find the only move that can save the game for black after h5. We know it's not g takes h5, so it must be something else. Okay, so the move that was necessary in this position was rook d5, attacking the g5 pawn. Now, if I were to play h takes g6, he can take on g5 with check. And if this pawn is eliminated, rook f8 is no longer working. Because rook takes, queen wouldn't make any sense when black has the flight square. And if rook g4 in this position, well, that's just fine for black because they'll swap rooks and then take on e7. And they've survived the worst of this by far. So after rook d5, I had in my analysis the best try for white being king g4. Still persisting in trying to get the pawn up to g6. Here, however, black can play rook d4 now that the king has been drawn onto the fourth rank. And with that move, black is just trying to swap a pair of rooks. Now it's actually good to swap a pair of rooks for black because it reduces the chance that they'll get checkmated, basically. So rook d4, let's say white goes here. Black can take on h5 with check. King takes h5, rook d7, and black will do a good job of just eliminating this pawn at this point. They might be able to play rook takes e4 as well, but if rook takes e4, rook takes e4, king here, I guess g6 check. Maybe king f6 then. This is one line I haven't looked at. But rook d7 in this position would also do the trick. Because black will win that e7 pawn, and white's pawn never made it to g6. And I think a position like this should be drawn with best play, even with not necessarily best play. So that was the very narrow path that Andrew had to make a draw in this position after h5. He has to find rook d5, attacking the g5 pawn, drawing the enemy king forward, and then rook d4. That's the only order of moves I think that will cut it. One line I looked at that's kind of interesting too is if black plays rook d7, I saw the following line in the game. Rook d7 makes sense in order to attack e7 before the pawn hits g6. I was planning on going rook fe3, reinforcing this pawn. And then if king f7, bring the king up to also add an attacker to e7 and maybe defend g6. Then white can go h takes g6 check, king takes g6, rook e6 check. And unfortunately for black, they cannot take on g5 because of rook 3 to e5 checkmate. So what would happen is that after rook e6, if black is unable to take this pawn, probably they'll retreat their king. So let's say king f7, and then I get g6 check in. And once again, black is completely frozen. This time it's actually harder for white to go rook to f8 because they need the rook back on the f-file, and as soon as that were to happen, black could take this. But I'm pretty sure white can win just by bringing their king up now and trying to eventually walk the king over to the queen side, because there's a pretty good chance that black will be in zugzwang pretty soon. mean, they can barely move. I mean, this rook cannot move. This king is confined to 2 squares. So black's only active piece is this rook, which also has to stay like pretty close to the e7 pawn. So I believe this line is also winning for white. What other line? There's one other line I was looking at. Black can also try rook d6 in this position, but I don't think this move works either because of h6 this time. So bypassing h takes g6, so h6. And the point is, like, let's say after a trade, white is threatening to go rook f8 check, rook takes f8, and then h7 check. So just to illustrate that, let's say g5, trying to use the rook to attack this pawn. Rook f8, rook takes, h7 check, and white's pawns just do all the damage, basically. King g7, white can take on f8, and if king takes, white queens the other pawn. Game over. So those pawns have such a cramping influence around black's king, and they create threats as well. So that's why I would play h5 over again, if I had this position again. Even knowing that black can draw with best play, I think it's still white's best chance to try to win this position, because it demands a very precise continuation. Rook d5, king up, king g4, king h4, and then rook d4. And black can hold, but they have to find that accurate line. I kind of feel for Andrew because I could tell he was like, I think he believed this position to be lost after h5. Or maybe that's not accurate. I think he just overlooked the idea, basically, as I alluded to earlier. I think he overlooked the idea of rook f8 followed by this. He might have sensed that his position wasn't so good, but he overlooked that idea of rook f8 followed by queening. And as I said, the game ended when I played g6. He went rook d6, or sorry, h4 check. I took with a rook d6, and then this rook h8 check move. Remember the rook h8 check move, because there's a game I'm going to show you coming up from this tournament where this move also turned out to be a turning point in the game, specifically the move rook h8 check. So keep that in mind as I go through the games from this tournament. So I hope you guys enjoyed this Queen's Gambit Decline battle against Andrew Tang. And yeah, I'm planning on doing one of these videos every day or two for the 5 rounds that this tournament encompassed. So if you like this, please leave me some feedback. Also, if you have any suggestions about how I can improve this experience for you guys, let me know. And yeah, I'll be back in another day or two with another game. My second round game, as I said, was against Sean Nagel, who eventually won the tournament. So that will be very interesting for us to look at. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one. I'll talk to you later.